Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Retro YuGiOh, and for today's video, we're going to be doing an updated Yu-Gi-Oh! Meta tier list post Rage of the Abyss. Rage of the Abyss introduces new cards like the Azumina card support engine, a new Fire King in Volcanics, which does change how the deck plays a little bit, a new Fiendsmith support in Fiendsmith Lacrima, and as well as the new introduction of other archetypes like the Atlanteans and Mermail stuff. We're going to be covering all of those in the updated meta tier list, as well as the impact of Mulchami Full Blast and Dominus Impulse on which decks actually can be excelling in this format and which ones maybe aren't. So let's get into the video, but before we do, remember to hit that like button if you enjoy these types of videos, and additionally hit that subscribe button if you enjoy seeing my type of content. That being said, let's get into the video. Here we go, we've got our meta tier list, and as always, we're still using the same format. We have Tier 1, these will be the best decks, or these are the decks you should be considering when building your deck for a big event. Tier 1.5, these are decks that are not quite as good as the decks above them, but they can still compete just as equally well, and they have the chance to win events as well if put in the right spot. Tier 2, these are decks that are very powerful or can still affect and take games of the top decks, just not consistently. And then obviously we have the Rogue tier, which is just Rogue. We have pretty much all of the decks I thought would be relevant for the upcoming format. So I'm not going to include, like, say, the 30 other decks which still can technically be played, but just don't have relevancy in the format. With that being said, let's get started. The first deck, no surprise, tier 1 is Fiendsmith Yubel. Fiendsmith Yubel is probably the best deck of the format. It hasn't gotten any weaker. It can still do just as much as it could pre-ROTA. In fact, it can even do a little bit more because of the new Lacrima, which is the level 4 Fiendsmith card in Rage of the Abyss. It makes your combos into Fiendsmith even better than before, just because Lacrima exists. That being said, this deck does get hurt by Mulchami Full Blast and also Dominus Impulse a little bit, so it's going to be not as a distant first as it was previously, but it's still most likely the best deck of the format. However, we also have another contender for it in Fire King Snake Eyes Azumina. Just full disclaimer, every single deck that can play the level 1 fire monsters and the Simple Spoils engine will be using Azumina support engine. There is no reason not to. Fire King Snake Eyes is probably the second best deck, or maybe even equal first with Fiendsmith Yubel. This deck has the ability to play around Mulchami Full Blast, where it can actually special summon itself from hand by adding to hand first and then going to grave, special summoning from grave. So it doesn't really give your opponent a lot of cards of Full Blast if they need to pivot, unlike the Yubel deck. This deck is still very powerful. Its one card engine starters are just phenomenal, where it can set up Omni Negates, just like the Yubel deck. It can set up Desiree if you choose to play Fiendsmith in there. You don't have to though. But if you don't play Fiendsmith, you can then set up like a level 8 in Hope Harbinger, rank 8 in Hope Harbinger, which is a spell negate. You have ROTA, which is a monster negate. You have Silvera, the Omni negate from Azumina. Plus you have a bunch of other interruptions as well. So this deck is very powerful. It's very layered in what it can do as well. Additionally, you got to play the Snake Eyes engine, which is just, it's an unfair engine that shouldn't really still be existing in the format. But this is it for my tier 1. I think these are the two decks to beat, and for good reason. They just do the most. Next, we have the Ritual Beast. So Ritual Beast is still, in my opinion, it's not any better than it was before. However, it is a very good deck to play Shifter in, where Shifter makes your combos better. That being said, it is a deck that is affected by both Mulchamis, where you have to summon from extra deck a lot, you have to summon from hand a lot, you have to special summon from deck. It's one of those decks where the Mulchamis could very much impact this deck, as well as Dominus Impulse is now another card that impacts this deck quite a lot. But granted, it's still a Shifter deck. It can still play Protoss, and Protoss is very powerful at affecting the top two decks, calling Fire or Dark. I still think Tempai Dragons is a 1.5 tier deck. The problem with Tempai is it's a very linear strategy, where you pretty much have to go second to have success with this deck. But the best thing about this deck now is that you have more things that can help you win with this deck. Dominus Impulse and Mulchami Full Blast, they are both very good cards for this deck, and it's not as though Tempai got worse because of the introduction of these cards. If anything, it just got better. It's also a deck that can play Shifter as well, so that's another factor to just take into account. But again, it's still Tempai. It's a very linear gameplay, just battle phase attack. If you get stopped, you probably can't win. And also, Tempai has a really rough Yubel Fiendsmith matchup, but it's very good into the Fire King Snake Eye matchup. That's all I have for tier 1.5. We have a lot of the tier 2 decks, which because they have innate flaws with them, so this is going to maybe get a little bit of backlash, but I still believe Fiendsmith Snake Eye with the Azumina cards it is a tier 2 deck, just because unless you open exactly a way to start with Witch or a Sinful Spoils card, having access to the Azumina cards is not possible. And when you don't have access to the Azumina cards, this deck, its one card Snake Eye Ash combos are just very weak or suboptimal. So with that being said, I don't think this deck is very good for that, as well as I don't think it has enough cards to really be called a pure deck anymore. You have to play a second Oak just to have follow-up. Now, given all that, the deck is still very powerful. When it resolves its full combo with Witch and Ash, it ends on a God board. But given that you have to open very specific cards and hand traps kind of matter more now, I don't know if this deck will see a lot of success, or maybe you won't even see a lot of play. Fiendsmith Memento. I think Fiendsmith Memento could be one of the better decks that just people are not talking about, mainly because people don't know what all the cards do. But this deck is very capable of using the Fiendsmith cards to bridge into their engine to give them protection. You can make both Caesar and Desiree if you open the right set of cards, as well as that the 5,000 attack boss body that they have with the trap is just extra. It's like Appaloosa on legs. So people don't understand this deck, but you probably should, because the deck is very good if it can resolve what it wants to do. But much like the other decks in the format, it is very heavily impacted by hand traps at the right moments. And yeah, that's pretty much what it is. It's a solid tier 2 deck, but has a chance. I could easily see this being a better tier 1.5 deck. But for now, we'll be safe and leave it in tier 2. Tier 2 is also branded. It's not really much to say about branded. It's just a solid tier 2 deck. Again, it does what it does. It's still able to puppet lock you, but everyone's playing Ash. Everyone's playing Molchamis. You're going to give them a lot of draws. Blue Wonderies, I still think Flu is a good tier 2 deck. It plays Shifter. It doesn't get affected by the Molchami Furos, which everyone is going to be main decking. It's heavily affected by Perulia, though, which most people should be side decking. But this deck is very good at being able to put up floods, being able to just say helmet your opponent to death, and then Shifter them if need be. The problem is it's the second best Shifter deck behind Tempite Dragons and Ritual Beasts. So it's not even the best Shifter deck anymore. And yeah, not much to say. If you're playing in Europe specifically, Rika Sun Avalon is a tier 1 deck. Make sure you are prepared for this if you're outside North America. If you're inside North America, then just ignore it, because it's a rogue deck and you'll probably never see it. Fiendsmith Chimera is another deck that's like okay. I would still consider this it's a go second board breaker deck where you don't really play hand traps. The problem is, versus some of the top decks right now, being Fiendsmith Yubel and Fiendsmith Snake Eye, sometimes a board breaker approach is just not good enough. And that's like where, in my opinion, the board breaker versions of decks are just not good enough unless you draw multiple board breakers. And even so, you sometimes don't even have enough to beat the hand traps. Runic Stun, I feel like this deck is just going to be a consistent tier 2 deck. It's just a stun deck. If you get the right set of floodgates, you pretty much just can win any game. But if you don't, you'll lose any game. The gameplay is very linear. It doesn't do a whole lot. Not really much to say there. Whitewoods Runic, I think this deck is quite fun to play. The problem I have with this deck is that if Fire King Snake Eyes becomes a top deck, which I expect it to, Draw and Lockbird may be entering the format again, and this deck needs to draw a bunch of cards to be able to play. The other issue I have seen with this deck is gameplay takes a long time, and sometimes you just can lose based on the clock if you don't win game 1. That's really the issue with what Runic, but it's still probably the best combo Runic deck that can draw its whole deck in one turn. Mimighoul. The new Mimighoul support is very, very good. The issue with it is it's still Mimighoul's setting, and all the Sinful Spoils cards can just out the Mimighoul sets and out your luck with the field spell. So this is definitely still a rogue deck. In another format, maybe this will be better. Labyrinth should be tier 2. Again, a very powerful trap deck. It can pretty much, in the right situation, you can break any board going second if you play the Sphere modes or Lava Golems like Joshua Schmidt did for YCS Lil. And if you go first, you're playing a trap deck that can pretty much just win every matchup. Tearlaments, very fun deck, but just it's very flawed in what it can do. Everyone's playing Bestials because of Fiendsmith Yubel, and it just has great overlap versus Tearlaments, as well as there are good shifter decks in the format like Tempai, Ritual Beasts. So it's got to contend with those, which is like an auto loss if you get shifted. Rescue Ace I want to put at Rogue, or somewhere around here. The problem with Rescue Ace right now is the engine itself is very powerful, but the problem with Rescue Ace is it doesn't have enough room for non-engine. And if you're going to try and put enough non-engine into Rescue Ace, you're going to go way over 40 cards. That's where I see the issue. However, the engine of what this deck can do is excellent, where it can play the Azamina cards, the Rescue Ace card set force. You have both layered interaction in terms of monster interruptions and spell trap interruptions. That's great. It's just the ability to not play as much non-engine, that's where it falls short. Centurion is still a rogue. While post ROTA, it can be a pretty good deck where it gives you a few interruptions, you get extra draws, and you get a Cosmic Blazer, which is a negate. That's all good, but again, the deck it feels like it's just too easily countered, especially without like calamities anymore. So I would put it in Rogue, maybe Rogue Plus, but it's just, I don't see this deck doing enough versus what the top decks can do. Additionally, Bestials, again, are being played because of Fiendsmith Yubel, and that impacts Centurion a little bit as well. And lastly, we have the Mermail deck. It's the new deck from Rage of the Abyss. This deck is very fun to play. It has a hand rip, it can set up Toad for Omni Negates, it has spell negations, it has destruction. This is a very good deck. The problem is, I don't know how good it would be against some of the Molchamis. I don't know how good it would be into all of the hand traps. I'm also not 100% certain about how much engine you have to play to be able to play this deck optimally when you consider how much non-engine you can play. That's another issue. So not saying these decks are bad, I'm saying that they can't play as much non-engine, which is too important for the current format. Because if you let Fiendsmith Yubel or Fire King Snake Eyes Azamina go first, resolve a combo uninterrupted, no matter how many breakers you have, it's just not going to be enough to play, and then also go through the hand traps. That's the biggest issue with the format. This is my meta tier list for the post Rage of the Abyss format. Let me know what you think of this list, and let me know down in the comment section below if you'd change anything, what isn't on this list that you would like to see added. Love to hear about it. I'm YuGiOh. That's all.